a lot of nonverbal abilities, but there seems to be normal, or in some cases even extremely high intelligence, but the social and language impairments and the stereotype behaviors really make it hard for that kid to express that intelligence well. Development, point 2 here. How early can you diagnose autism? This is the holy grail now. Could we find it at 1 year? Could we find it at 9 months or 6 months or even 3 months? Lots of research going on to detect so that parents would have the chance for early intervention. But what's fascinating is that in about 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 cases of autism, with the best records we can glean, the kid had all the milestones at 6 months, was starting to roll over, walking by 12 months, first words by 13, 14 months, etc. And then at 15 or 18 or 21 months, the kid slid back really hard. So there's a subset of kids with autism spectrum disorder who seem to have normal infant development and then get quickly arrested and fall back. Now that would be a discovery if we could figure out why that's happening. Most of the rest of kids with autism, when can parents really tell? Well, they can really tell if you try to send a kid to nursery school or preschool. And then the teacher's going, what is the matter with this kid? Very socially unrelated. But the parents will say, gee, we really thought at about 1.5 years he was pretty different. And if you ask further, boy, you know what, 12 months, at first birthday, things seem pretty different too. What do the first birthday videotape studies show? So just as with schizophrenia, if you take in Psych 130, fascinating line of research now, where families of kids with autism are asked to retrieve the videos they made of their kid's first birthday party. And then you get coders to look at those tapes, as well as tapes of kids' first birthday parties who didn't go on to develop autism. Can you tell the difference? Are there signs at 12 months that would say, aha, this kid's going to develop autism and this kid didn't? Yes, with about 95% accuracy. And what are the big signals at that first birthday party? What does everybody say at your birthday party? Stevie, it's your birthday. Kids with autism don't respond to their name. It's like the kids are all saying, the parents are saying, well, the older siblings are calling your name. And so like, were they talking about me? So lack of recognition to name and a more general lack of social relatedness, because first birthday parties are all about kids, toddlers, developing toddlers, getting all that social recognition. Kids with autism that may not get diagnosed until they're 2 or 3 look really different at their first birthday parties. But again, maybe 1 in 3, 4, or 5, I put 1 in 5 here, recent estimates are a little bit higher. If you look back at their first birthday parties, they look like other 1-year-olds, but something happened in that second year of life. Now, what's the big thing that happens in the second year of life? Pruning. What do 1-year-olds, what do 6-month-olds and 1-year-olds look like? They're these odd humans with these really big heads, right? Especially right at birth. And then your body kind of increases in size, and you are born with double the number of neurons you need later in life. So you've got to prune about half of the neurons. They die out if they don't connect. It may be that a subset of kids with autism fail to prune adequately in that second year of life, somewhere between 12 and 24 months. Attachment. Maybe kids with autism, maybe Bettelheim was right, they're insecurely attached. If you do a classic strange situation, remember back from very early lectures, or Psych 146, I think, Professor Main's course if you've taken it, maybe there are disruptions in attachment. Well, here's the interesting thing. If you're doing a strange situation with a little 12 or 15 or 18-month-old who's on the road to autism, you have to really code those pretty carefully because the kids are acting a little different from other kids. But if you take into account their language oddities and some of their social deficits, most kids with autism are very securely attached to their primary caregiver. So it doesn't seem as though the psychogenic lack of attachment theory really has a lot of legs to it. What is going on with the social deficit? Remember theory of mind? Maybe we all are adapted in this human species to do something magical between the ages of 3 and 4. What happens between the ages of 3 and 4? And we didn't have to go to preschool to get it. We figure out that other people think differently from the way we do. Remember the Smarties test, the British M&Ms, right? You're sitting there, and the experimenter comes in, kind of plays a trick, and puts pencils in the Smarties box, and then the next kid comes in, and the experimenter asks, well, what's Billy going to think is in the Smarties box? What do most kids at 4 say? Well, duh, Smarties. He doesn't know there's pencils in there. What do kids with autism say at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? Pencils, because I saw pencils. So of course Billy's going to think that what happened in the real world is what I saw. A lack of ability to reflect on the fact that other people have different minds from you. Now, this is a big area in developmental research. It turns out the theory of mind doesn't develop at 3.5. It might develop at 1.5. But you can't ask kids, so you've got to figure out other ways that they are inferring that actually others think differently from the way they do. So one of the ideas of autism is that there's this module, there's this part of your mind that naturally unfolds into social awareness that doesn't develop in kids with autism, even if they otherwise have good IQ scores and high intellectual abilities. And what do some adolescents and adults with high-functioning autism do? They can later on pass the Smarties test, but if you ask them, they say, this wasn't natural for me. I had to sit down and figure it out. I had to calculate. Okay, I was sitting here, experimenter came in, pencils. Oh yeah, shit, that's right. Of course they got a kid to think that. So maybe the social processing of people with autism is much more laborious and analytic. Remember the male brain theory, analytic thinking? There's not a natural social empathy, if you will, but it takes some calculation. The very bottom of the slide, Connor wrote, he did the first follow-up study of kids with autism because he defined the disorder, and he did this in the 40s and 50s, and there was one classically very bright autistic boy that he'd evaluated, and then the boy went on to high school, actually went to a public high school, needed some special support, and the kid was fairly popular despite his autism, and was asked to give the homecoming speech at the pep rally before the big high school football game. And what did the kid do? He went on the podium, and he gave a perfectly reasoned argument as to why the home team would lose. He was right, the team got crushed, but that's not what you do at a pep rally. You forget the truth, and you rally support for your team. So, right, maybe a lack of relatedness as to what the social situation demands. Interesting work on autism of late. It's not just your speech and the use of pronouns, but there's something in language called pragmatics. It's not just what you say, but it's your body language, and it's your eye contact, and it's conveying the meaning in other ways than just the syntax you use. And kids with autism don't do very well in the pragmatics of language, as well as sometimes with the actual syntax and semantics of language. One of the big theories of autism, the fourth point here, is that maybe what's heritable, what's inherited, if you will, is something about your sensory capacities. Maybe many kids with autism are really hyper-attuned to the environment. So kids with autism spectrum features. I mean, a lot of kids do this, but some kids it really bothers a lot. Remember that tag at the back of your shirt here? I've got a t-shirt on so I can't feel it. And these are the kids who do, you've got to cut this out. Very sensitive to heat or cold. Maybe it's a kind of perceptual overwrougtness that makes it really difficult. And what's the most stimulating thing you can do? Have somebody stare you in the face, right? It's a lot of emotional and social overload. And so it may be that some of autism features are kind of trying to back down from social and other kind of more tactual, perceptual feelings that you have. What about families? Families of kids with autism until the last couple of decades, if you're brave enough to bring your kid in, oh, there's a diagnosis of autism. By the way, parents, you caused it. You were the emotional refrigerators. So families have to overcome a lot of shame and stigma, a lot of the feeling in the whole field, the belief in the whole field that parenting was the cause of this condition. So stigma is a big contributor. Very interesting qualitative studies published a few years ago looked at a survey and then got some interviews of parents of kids with very serious autism, with kids in the intellectually disabled range, and another group of families of kids with high-functioning autism. Who experienced the most stigma? The families of kids with high-functioning autism. Well, wait a minute, those kids were actually in school, in public school, and doing better, but they acted weird, and everybody said, you must have caused your kid to do those shocking things at the birthday party or say those inappropriate things. The families of the kids with very severe autism, it's almost as though people said, oh, well, that kid's intellectually disabled too, we'll cut the family some slack. But the closer in some ways you are to the normal range, the more stigma that accrues to families because it must be their fault for causing the kids inconsistencies. What's the heritability of autism? We know this now from twin and a few adoption studies. Genes have a lot to do with where you are on the bell curve of social relatedness and language abilities and repetitive stereotype motor behaviors. 80 to 90% are the main estimates of the heritability these days. So it's higher than bipolar disorder, higher than ADHD. Probably the most genetically linked, if you will, condition we know of is autism spectrum disorders. However, Neil Reich over at UCSF published a paper a couple years ago using the California Kaiser database, and this is lots of families, and said, I think we've overestimated the heritability because why? Because he found, looking at the Kaiser data, that the fraternal twins, not just the identical twins, the fraternal twins, if one had autism, there was a high chance that the co-twin would have autism. So remember, fraternal twins share how much of their genetic material? 50%. Identical twins, all. What's happening with fraternal twins? Maybe there are prenatal, not just androgen, but toxins or other chemicals that are making even fraternal twins come out more alike. So there may be some biological but non-genetic shared similarities between twins that are fueling autism as well. Question somewhere right there. That might be an androgen hypothesis, and they're looking, of course, now at other mechanisms, other kinds of chemicals that might make fraternal twins more likely to have autism shared, not just identical twins. Other questions about this? We're going fast, trying to cover a lot of ground. Okay, so heritability is very high, but there may be non-genetic but early biological shared environments that actually propel joint autism as well. Now, what's the most recent research? Autism has really strong genetic undercurrents, but not necessarily inherited. So what happens during meiosis? The double chromosomes are splitting into one each in the egg, in the sperm, and they're reuniting at fertilization, right? What happens especially as parents get older? The DNA goes a little haywire during the splitting. You get a base pair kind of tweaked, or you get a whole CNV, you don't need to know this, copy number variant. A whole sequence, 100, 1,000 base pairs, nucleotide pairs, get out of whack and kind of get deleted. What's a big risk factor for autism these days? Age of parent, especially dad. Dads over 45, 50 have a disproportionate number of kids with autism. So it may be that it's not that the dad had autism and granddad had autism, it's being passed down, but when the dad is forming his own sperm, that there are, the older the dad gets, some genetic mistakes that get made that may predispose to neurodevelopmental disorders. So some of the genetics of autism these days aren't generation to generation. They may be new cases that appear spontaneously because of these inborn errors of the formation of an ovum or a sperm. Eric Korchain was a Cal Psych major a number of years ago. Really cool guy, professor at UC San Diego, a world expert in autism. He changed the field back 30 years ago by a really high-tech measurement device. It's called a tape measure. He would take tape measures and measure the head circumference of very young kids at risk for autism, and was the one that discovered that there's a subgroup of kids with autism whose heads are way too big. They weren't starting to prune and get the head sort of more normatively, proportionally shaped with the rest of the body. So that's, of course, led to, and he's a high-tech guy too, brain imaging studies, hard to get very young kids in imaging machines, but you can do it more and more, that maybe, again, there's a failure to prune as one of the mechanisms for at least a subset of people with autism. Early parenting. Parents used to be blamed for all of this, but parents are certainly noticing something's wrong at 6 months, 9 months, certainly by a year, and then, of course, in the preschool years, parents are bombarded with, your kid doesn't fit. So it's very stressful and, of course, stigmatizing, as we just mentioned, to be a parent of a kid with autism spectrum disorders, but what's really needed is support for parents who are reacting to these early, very biological differences these kids are expressing. Vaccinations. Jenny McCarthy, right? What happens in those kids, that subgroup, who don't show autism spectrum in the first year and a half of life, but suddenly do at 18 or 21 months? Well, what's true? So our oldest son is a grad student, and our youngest is 10. In the 16-year difference, our youngest got, when he was a baby, twice as many vaccines as our oldest. It's just the way of the world now. And at some, like 6 and 9 and 12 months, 15 months, the kid's in there for a long time crying their eyes out because they're getting all these vaccinations. So what used to be the thing that held the vaccines inside the shot thingy? Mercury, called thimerosal. It's a mercury derivative. If you give a lot of mercury to animal brains, it poisons the brain. So the theory was that maybe the mercury in vaccines was actually triggering autism. It's not true. There are studies all around the world and the United States that show even when countries have systematically taken all of the thimerosal, the mercury derivative, out of vaccines, rates of autism go up radically every year. But correlation sometimes implies causation. Maybe your kid's been normally developing, you went to the doctor, they got all these vaccinations, and a few weeks later they started to show these autism symptoms. Probably a case of illusory correlation, but it's led to a lot of speculation and anguish and policy that you shouldn't vaccinate your kid. Well, what happens if you don't vaccinate your kid? There's measles epidemics now in some parts of the United States, and if you don't vaccinate everybody, it's a big problem. So it's a kind of classic example of a couple of celebrities and a kind of web presence promoting a false science idea that's actually been pretty costly. Maybe, however, just maybe, there's a few cases in which a kid's inherited a set of genes that are very sensitive to vaccination. So there could be some gene-environment interaction in very selected cases. So, a couple of points we got to wrap up. Is autism a disorder, or is it a creative, not very social way of thinking? Go to www.neurodiversity.com. Don't open your laptops now and do it after class, right? So, Maybe Einstein had Asperger's disorder, or maybe Sir Isaac Newton, or maybe a lot of physicists, or a lot of very creative, non-traditional people. The problem with taking the neurodiversity way of thinking to an extreme is you don't really need to treat autism. These kids are going to end up fine if we can just give a right environment. Tell that to the parent of the autistic kid who's never spoken by 5, who's having seizures, and it's costing the family bundles every year to get the kid support. At its extremes, ADHD is a clear disorder, but it might cause some divergent thinking. Maybe some autistic symptoms make you think outside the box, but at its extreme, it clearly is a disorder. So why so much more ASD, autism spectrum disorders these days? Clearly, it's a label that now gets you services. So there's a big push to get, and it's much better to have a, quote, autism diagnosis than a retardation or intellectual disability diagnosis, less stigmatizing. So part of this is recognition. Part of it is we now say that more of these symptoms are in the autism spectrum category. Services are a big part of this. So we'll pick this up at the beginning, the last slide of next time. What's the main treatment for autism? Early detection and early behavior mod and language simulation. We'll pick up on that next time.